Beneath the divided city of Berlin, a secret operation was unfolding in total silence. Above ground, soldiers stood watch, barbed wire cut through streets, and the world saw a city split between two superpowers. But below the surface, hidden from sight, buried in darkness, American and British intelligence were carrying out one of the most daring espionage missions of the Cold War. A tunnel dug deep under East Berlin. Its purpose was simple and incredibly dangerous: to tap directly into Soviet military communications. Every order, every plan, every movement, all of it flowing through cables buried underground. And if those lines could be intercepted, the United States wouldn't just observe the Cold War, it would hear the enemy thinking. But if the operation was discovered, it wouldn't just fail, it could trigger an international crisis and expose one of the most audacious intelligence missions ever attempted. In the years following World War II, Berlin became the front line of a new kind of conflict. The city, once the capital of Nazi Germany, was divided between the victorious powers. The United States, the United Kingdom, and France controlled the western sectors, while the Soviet Union held the east. What began as occupation quickly hardened into confrontation. Two ideologies, two systems, two visions of future, all compressed into a single city. Tensions escalated rapidly. Checkpoints were established. Movement was restricted. Surveillance became constant. And beneath it all, both sides were locked in a silent battle for information. Because in the Cold War, knowledge was power. And nowhere was that more true than in Berlin. The Soviet Union maintained a massive military presence in East Germany. Troop movements, logistical operations, and strategic decisions were coordinated through an extensive network of landlines, secure, reliable, and hidden from traditional interception. For American intelligence, this presented a critical challenge. They knew the Soviets were communicating constantly, but they couldn't hear what was being said. Without that information, U.S. commanders were left with uncertainty. And in a city where a single escalation could spiral out of control, uncertainty was dangerous. Traditional espionage had its limits. Agents could be captured. Radio signals could be encrypted. Aerial surveillance revealed positions, but not intentions. The United States needed something more direct, something bold, something that would bypass Soviet security entirely. And that's when a remarkable idea began to take shape. If the Soviets were relying on underground cables to communicate, then perhaps the only way to listen was to go underground as well. The concept was as simple as it was audacious. Dig a tunnel from West Berlin into the Soviet-controlled East. Find the main communication lines and tap them. It was a plan that required precision, secrecy, and absolute discipline. Because the margin for error was almost non-existent, the tunnel would have to be constructed without alerting Soviet patrols. Every vibration, every sound, every movement underground carried the risk of detection. And if discovered, the consequences would be immediate. The Soviets wouldn't just shut it down. They would expose it, publicly, turning it into a political weapon against the United States and its allies. Still, despite the risks, the operation moved forward, because the potential reward was extraordinary. Direct access to Soviet military communications in the heart of Europe, real-time intelligence on troop movements, readiness levels, and strategic planning. It wasn't just about gathering information. It was about removing uncertainty. And in the Cold War, that meant everything. Deep within a secure facility in West Berlin, planning began in total secrecy. Engineers, intelligence officers, and military specialists worked together to solve a problem unlike any before. How do you build a tunnel under one of the most heavily monitored borders in the world without anyone noticing? The answer required more than just engineering. It required ingenuity. The entrance would be hidden inside a warehouse, disguised as an ordinary structure. Excavation would be done carefully, quietly, often at night. Specialized equipment would minimize vibrations. Soil would be removed without drawing attention. Every detail had to be controlled, because once the tunnel crossed into East Berlin, there would be no room for mistakes. This wasn't just construction. It was covert warfare beneath the ground. And if you're interested in Cold War stories like this, where strategy, innovation, and risk collide in ways few people ever see, consider subscribing, because what happened next would turn this operation into one of the most remarkable intelligence successes of the era. As the digging began, the men working underground knew exactly what was at stake. They weren't just building a tunnel. They were carving a path into the inner workings of the Soviet military machine. Every foot forward brought them closer to the target, and closer to being discovered, because somewhere above them, unseen and unaware, the Soviet forces continued their operations, completely unaware that beneath their feet, the United States was listening for a way in. The digging moved forward inch by inch in absolute silence. Beneath the streets of Berlin, hidden from the watchtowers and patrols above, a small team worked in conditions few would ever see. The air was thick, the space was tight, and every sound, every scrape of metal against earth had to be controlled, because just a few meters above them, Soviet-controlled territory began. One mistake, one unexpected vibration, and the entire operation could be exposed. The tunnel stretched gradually eastward, reinforced with timber supports, and carefully engineered to prevent collapse. Specialized tools were used to reduce noise. Even the disposal of excavated soil had to be managed with precision, hidden within routine activity, so nothing would raise suspicion. This wasn't just construction. It was a race between progress and discovery. At the surface, life in Berlin continued as usual. Soldiers marched. Vehicles passed through checkpoints. Civilians went about their daily routines, unaware that beneath them, one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations of the Cold War was taking shape. Inside the tunnel, time felt different. There were no windows, no sense of day or night, only the steady rhythm of controlled excavation, and the constant awareness that they were operating directly beneath the reach of an adversary that would not hesitate to act. And yet, despite the pressure, the tunnel kept advancing, because the target was clear. Somewhere beneath East Berlin ran the Soviet communication cables, thick, insulated lines carrying the voice of the Soviet military command across Eastern Europe. Orders, reports, strategic updates, the raw flow of information that defined Soviet operations. Finding those lines was the key, and eventually they did. When the digging team reached the precise location, the pace slowed even further. This was the most delicate phase of the entire operation. The cables couldn't simply be cut or exposed recklessly. Any disruption could alert Soviet technicians monitoring the network. Instead, intelligence specialists moved in with carefully designed equipment, tools capable of tapping into the lines without interrupting the signal. It required precision at the highest level. Millimeter by millimeter, the cables were accessed, connections were established, and for the first time, the United States was directly inside Soviet communications. What followed was extraordinary. Voices, real conversations, orders being issued in real time, movements being discussed before they happened. From deep beneath East Berlin, American and British intelligence began listening to the Soviet military as it operated, unfiltered, uninterrupted, and completely unaware. The information flowed continuously, day after day, night after night. Recordings were made, transcripts were analyzed, patterns were identified. It was one of the most valuable intelligence breakthroughs of the Cold War. For the United States, it meant something critical: clarity. No longer relying solely on estimates or indirect observation, American intelligence could now understand Soviet intentions with unprecedented accuracy. Troop deployments could be tracked before they were visible. Readiness levels could be assessed in real time. Strategic decisions could be anticipated rather than reacted to. And in a conflict where timing could mean everything, that advantage was invaluable. Back in Washington, the intelligence gathered from the tunnel began shaping decisions at the highest level. Military planners adjusted strategies. Commanders gained confidence in their assessments. And perhaps most importantly, fears of sudden, unpredictable Soviet actions were reduced, because now the United States could hear the signals before they turned into actions. But beneath that success, a quiet tension remained, because operations like this didn't stay secret forever. The longer the tunnel remained active, the greater the risk. Soviet engineers regularly inspected their communication networks. Security forces monitored infrastructure, and the border between East and West Berlin remained one of the most heavily observed lines in the world. At any moment, something could go wrong. A routine inspection could uncover the tap. A structural weakness could expose a tunnel, or a single piece of intelligence could fall into the wrong hands. Inside the tunnel, the men continued their work, fully aware that discovery wouldn't come with warning. It would come suddenly, and when it did, there would be no time to erase what had been done, no time to escape unnoticed, because this wasn't just a hidden passage. It was physical proof of an operation deep inside Soviet-controlled territory, proof that, if revealed, could be used to challenge the United States on the global stage. Still, the intelligence kept coming, and for a time, the operation remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Cold War. But far beyond the tunnel, beyond Berlin, beyond even Washington, something had already gone wrong. Because unknown to those working underground, the Soviets were not entirely in the dark, and the moment of discovery was already moving closer. For months, the tunnel operated in near total secrecy. Beneath East Berlin, conversations flowed uninterrupted. Soviet officers issued commands, discussed troop movements, coordinated logistics, never realizing their words were being recorded just meters below. To American and British intelligence, it was an extraordinary advantage, a direct line into the thinking of a rival superpower. Every intercepted message reduced uncertainty. Every conversation added clarity. And in a conflict defined by miscalculation, that clarity was invaluable. But what made the operation so effective also made it fragile, because it depended on one critical assumption, that the Soviets had no idea it existed. And that assumption wasn't entirely true. Long before the tunnel was even completed, a single breach had already changed everything. Deep within Western intelligence networks, a British officer named George Blake had secretly begun working for the Soviet Union. Positioned inside the very system designed to counter Soviet operations, he had access to highly sensitive information, including details of the tunnel project itself. And he passed it on to Moscow. From that moment on, the Soviets knew. They knew a tunnel was being built. They knew where it would emerge. They knew their communications were at risk. But instead of shutting it down immediately, they made a calculated decision. They would let it continue. For the Soviets, this wasn't just an intelligence breach. It was an opportunity. By allowing the tunnel to operate, they could control what the United States heard. They could feed selected information, monitor what was being intercepted, and preserve the identity of their source inside Western intelligence. It was a silent counter-operation, one where both sides believed they held the advantage. Below ground, nothing appeared different. The tunnel continued functioning. Recordings were made. Intelligence reports flowed back to analysts. From the American perspective, the operation remained a success. But above ground, in Soviet command centers, a different strategy was unfolding. Carefully, deliberately, they waited, because exposing the tunnel too early would raise questions. It could risk revealing their knowledge, and more importantly, their access to a valuable informant. Timing mattered, and when they chose to act, it had to serve a purpose beyond simply stopping the operation. Then, in April 1956, that moment arrived. Soviet and East German forces suddenly discovered the tunnel. The announcement was swift and public. Officials escorted journalists to the site. Cameras documented the underground structure. Images of cables, equipment, and passageways were broadcast to the world. What had been one of the most secret intelligence operations of the Cold War was now exposed, and the reaction was immediate. The Soviet Union condemned the operation as a blatant violation of sovereignty, an act of espionage carried out deep within their controlled territory. On the global stage, it became a powerful political tool, proof, they argued, of Western intrusion and deception. For the United States, the situation was far more complex. Privately, officials understood the value the tunnel had already delivered. The intelligence gathered over months had significantly improved understanding of Soviet military activity in Europe. But publicly, the exposure carried consequences. It reinforced the reality that the Cold War wasn't just being fought with armies or weapons, but with secrets. And sometimes, those secrets didn't stay buried. Yet even in exposure, there was something remarkable about the operation. Despite Soviet awareness, The tunnel had remained active long enough to collect a vast amount of intelligence, information that had already been analyzed, already been used, already shaped decisions. In that sense, the mission had succeeded before the world ever knew it existed. But the deeper truth was more unsettling, because this wasn't just a story of American ingenuity. It was also a reminder of the hidden battle within the Cold War itself. A war not just between nations, but within intelligence agencies, where loyalty could be compromised, where secrets could be traded, and where a single individual operating in silence could alter the outcome of an entire operation. As the tunnel was dismantled and the story spread across headlines, one thing became clear. The Cold War was not a conflict of clear victories and defeats. It was a constant struggle for advantage. And sometimes, both sides were listening at the same time. In the end, the tunnel beneath Berlin disappeared as quietly as it had been built. The entrance was sealed, the equipment removed. The passage that had once carried one of the most daring intelligence operations of the Cold War was left behind, hidden beneath layers of earth, history, and silence. But its impact did not fade, because long before its discovery, the operation had already delivered what it was meant to achieve. For months, the United States had listened directly to Soviet military communications in the heart of Europe. It had tracked movements, understood patterns, and gained insight into a system designed to remain hidden in a conflict defined by uncertainty. That level of access was extraordinary. It allowed American decision-makers to move with greater confidence. It reduced the risk of miscalculation, and it reinforced a critical advantage, not just in technology, but in strategy. The operation proved something fundamental about the Cold War. Victory wasn't always about force. It was about awareness, about staying one step ahead, even when the battlefield couldn't be seen. At the same time, the tunnel also revealed a harder truth. Even the most carefully planned operations could be compromised. Even the strongest systems could be penetrated from within. And in a world of intelligence and counterintelligence, trust itself became a vulnerability. Yet despite that, the legacy of the Berlin Tunnel endured. It demonstrated the level of ingenuity and determination that defined American and Allied intelligence efforts during the Cold War. Faced with a closed and heavily defended adversary, they didn't wait for access to be given. They created it, quietly, precisely, and at great risk. The lessons learned from that operation would shape future intelligence strategies, pushing innovation further, refining methods, and reinforcing the importance of combining technology with human insight. Because as the Cold War evolved, so did the tools used to fight it. Satellites would eventually replace tunnels. Signals intelligence would become more advanced, and the battlefield of information would expand far beyond a single city. But the principle remained the same. To understand your adversary, you had to find a way to listen. And in Berlin, beneath a divided city, the United States proved just how far it was willing to go do exactly that. The tunnel may have been exposed, the operation may have ended, but the message it sent was unmistakable. Even in the most controlled environments, even under constant surveillance, there was always a way in. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because there are many more Cold War stories that reveal just how far nations went in the shadows to stay one step ahead.